I just want to go back from old business from last week
Yeah.
when we were discussing the case of a person who is at home and an astrologer from a certain sect. He doesn't know much about the sect, but he comes over to your house and he says, today's a good day to stay home. So the question is, do we listen to him? Or not do we listen to him, but are you forbidden from staying home? Now, you might say that, well, of course, as you said, the Rambam says this is absolutely nothing. It's pure fabrication, and you're not allowed to do it. However, I remembered something that you're not allowed to fast on Shabbos, but there's several heterim. There are ways of getting out of it, certain things, and one of them is a cholam, a bad dream. And
Right.
on that, they say if the dream is bad enough, you're going to be, it's going to occupy you all day. You're going to think about it fast, and it's going to. And so perhaps in a situation like that, where there's going to be some distress to you, So I was just thinking maybe it
But
might be consistent
the
with the Rambam.
difference, but the difference would be that even the Rambam might hold that a dream could be something. You're allowed to make decisions based on dreams. You're not allowed to make decisions based on astrology. So it could depend on the origin of your motivation. If your origin of your motivation is something which is permitted, or let's call it neutral, then it could be you're allowed to make decisions based on it. But if the origin is astrology, you're not allowed to make decisions based on it. Your case is a little bit more complicated because in your case, he's not acting because of it as opposed to acting based on it. So let's say he makes the decision not to act, but doesn't explain his reasoning. Let's say somebody says, how come you're not coming to the baseball game today with everybody else? And he just says, I don't feel like it. But he never states out loud that the reason that he's not going is because of his horoscope. That would be an interesting case. I could see somebody arguing that since it's not doing something and he never stated his intent, because that's another issue. There are certain things that are forbidden that could be attitude or thoughts. So there are times, I think the Rambam says this, like when it comes to korbanos, when it comes to sacrifices, there are certain, like let's say pigul, which is at the time of the slaughtering of the animal, you intend to eat the sacrifice in the wrong place or at the wrong time. So that's called pigul. Now, when it says you intend, do you actually have to state the intention out loud, or could it be that you're just thinking it? And there are certain other things like that, like let's say yiush, where you give up on finding an object. So there are certain circumstances where if you give up on finding a lost object, the object is no longer yours. So do you have to say that out loud, or is it something that's just about intent? So here, does the person have to say it out loud, or is it just the intent? So let's say I'm the person, I'm God-fearing, but I don't need to go to a baseball game. I saw some guy who's supposedly an astrologer tells me it's a bad day for me to go to a baseball game. And I just figure, you know what? I don't need to go to the baseball game. I just won't go. So I didn't do an action based on it. I wasn't active based on it. And also, let's say I'll just not say anything out loud. If somebody asks me why I'm not going, I'll just say I don't feel like it. So in that case, it would be interesting to see whether or not you violated it. But I still would say the difference between a dream and the astrology is that you're allowed to make decisions based on dreams.
I thought the Talmud was they trash dreams mostly.
The Gemara says that every dream comes with chaff, but they don't trash dreams. They just they qualify it, let's say. So every dream comes with chaff. They also say that
What's chaff?
In other words, it's not all seed, but it's like the husk. So there's in every dream there are elements that are completely meaningless. Even if there is a meaningful something in that dream, but you may be holding on to an element that is not meaningful. It could be there's a particular dream that has something meaningful in it, but you can't tell the difference between what's meaningful and what's not. And so you might be worrying about something that is nothing. But the Gemara also says that it goes after the interpretation, that there's like a chapter on dreams in Brachos, and it says that the dream can go based on interpretation. So you're encouraged not to tell over to the dream to somebody who will give it a negative interpretation. But those are qualifications. They are not trashing the basic essence of a dream. And the Gemara says, if you see this in a dream, it means that. If you see that in a dream, it means this. And so, I don't know if I've ever heard what the Rambam says about dreams. The Rambam, certainly Yosef has dreams. Those are classified as dreams, and they're taken very seriously. I don't know what to do about Daniel. Daniel, the book of Daniel, is not in prophecy. It's not in the section of Navi. It's in Nevi'im. It's in the section of Ketuvim, in the writings. And whenever you're looking for explanations for why that is, the explanation is typically because he himself is not classified as a prophet, even though whatever his visions are taken extremely seriously. So it might be a subtle difference for why he's not called a prophet or why his book is not called prophecy, but it's not. So, but you see throughout that, and the dreams of Paro are taken seriously, the dream of Belshazzar is taken seriously. So you see that in Tanakh, and in the Gemara, whenever you see something about it, it is true that the Gemara is giving you ways or avenues to not take a dream seriously, but it seems like qualifications of a dream. But you are allowed to make decisions based on a dream, technically. And you are not allowed to make decisions based on astrology. But again, your case where the guy's not doing something based on it could be different, as long as he doesn't say he's not going because of the astrology. There were astrologers in Israel, from astrologers. It always sort of bothered me, but there were big rabbis that gave these people permission as long as they didn't use it for prognostication. If they just used it like going backwards to explain to somebody about their nature, about their character. There was a woman in Tzfat that people went to, and there were rabbinic figures, like Rav Scheinberg even told somebody he could go to her what she would tell you about past lives. And but again, it was almost like a therapeutic thing. Like she would say something like, the reason there was one guy in particular who was sort of scatterbrained, and especially always losing material possessions, kind of thing. And so she told him that in a previous life, he had been very materialistic and over attached to his things. And so now his tikkun is to live a life where he doesn't have a connection to material things as much. But anyways, so it was surprising to me that these kinds of things were considered okay. But and I knew people that they had these little calculating systems for astrology, and they'd work up your they give you a workup. It was like a whole workup. You tend to be like it reminds me of, have you ever seen the result of somebody's 23andMe test? You know, if you spit into a tube and pay like $100, you can get your genetic makeup. But in the genetic makeup, it will, it has, besides saying like where your ancestors are from, it also has this whole thing about, and one of them is, will you be annoyed by loud noises?
Yes, they ask constant questions, come back to you, and you'll get an email every once in a while. Would you be willing to answer this question or that question? Because I did 23andMe.
So you are part of like a continued survey that informs, if you have this genetic makeup, you're more likely to
Yes.
problem. Yeah, it's just hysterical. When you go through it,
Yeah.
it reminded me of these astrological workups that people were getting at that time. There was one student of mine who was just like totally into it and was so excited to do people's astrological workups, but it was backwards. For some reason, that was okay, but not going forwards, not prognosticating based on it. Okay, so, and then we had talked about sleight of hand, and the so we talked about people who continue to do who do like what we call magic. So he had said that that actually doing magic is forbidden, but you see in contemporary responsa that across the board they seem to understand that he's talking about people who do magic but are pretending that it's real. So people who do magic as a hobby or are professional magicians are counseled to say at the beginning that this is all sleight of hand, and to show an example of how they do a trick, to make it absolutely clear that this is just clever sleight of hand or tricks, and not that there is no such thing as magic, and that they're not doing magic. That's it. That would be their understanding is the Rambam would agree with that. There are some people who disagreed with the Rambam and said that there is such a thing as magic, but so then, I mean, I guess in order to be in compliance with them, you wouldn't be saying there's no such thing as magic. You would just be saying what I'm doing is not magic. And I mentioned to you, I have this book called The Sorcerer's Apprentice. In fact, I have it right here.
Is it by Mickey Mouse?
What?
Is it by Mickey Mouse?
No, that was in Fantasia, right?
Right. Right.
This is this book is written by a young man who became an apprentice to somebody who did magic in India, and then traveled throughout India to see the people that were actually doing it, on the streets, the street magic, and many of them were performing these tricks to as part of a bit that they are actual healers, magical healers. They're called God men. So here, this is a picture of a guy that does a particular kind of healing where you eat a certain kind of fish. And that's the healer. That's the author, the guy, in the t-shirt or whatever you call that, the polo shirt. And that's the people waiting for this healing. This is just like one of those things. There's just throngs of people that are waiting for this healing. Now, they believe these guys are magical healers and that they have powers. And so that, that's the thing where this guy who's going around knows they're using tricks because he's been trained in the same tricks. And so that's very much in keeping with the Rambam's idea. These people know they're doing tricks, but they're claiming to have special powers, and that's why they're so dangerous. Okay. I'm assuming we're here. He prohibited us from witchcraft entirely. So the word is kishuf. Mechashef is a witchcraft, a witch. And that is a saying, let no one be found among you who is a sorcerer. One who transgresses this negative commandment is liable for stoning when they do it on purpose, and a sin offering when they do it inadvertently. The regulations of the commandment have been explained in chapter 7 of Sanhedrin, Parsha Shoftim, Mishnah Torah, foreign worship, and custom of nations. There, by the way, there is in different cultures of Jews, there are like sort of underground groups that have what they call segulot. A segula is something that is noted to have an impact on you without any scientific kind of explanation. So, for instance, if a woman is concerned about early contractions, she's to wear a red stone around her neck. This is so pervasive. When we were living in Israel, in the communities, it was just immediately done. It would be like your mother or your grandmother came to you after they heard that somebody said you got to worry about early contractions. They would just go to the person with the red stone. They'd come back and they'd bring you the red stone. We're all aware of people wearing the red bindle, the red string, which is very pervasive in certain communities. There are people that have kameos. These kameos they're referred to in the Gemara as well. There are people that have kameos that are leather pouches that might have something written on parchment inside of them, or they might have certain herbs or certain something inside of them, and you're supposed to wear it around your neck. My father had a cousin who was very close to, who had some kind of diagnosis, and he went, we're talking about, let's say 40 years ago, he was told, go to a Kabbalist. He went to a Kabbalist. The Kabbalist gave him one of those kameas. And he told my father that she can't take this off. She has to keep it on the whole time. And he actually brought it back for her to put it on. So you have these kinds of things. Now, do I know what the origin of these things is? No. It's possible that the origin, I'm not casting aspersion on any one of those three that I mentioned. I'm just saying, I don't know what they come from. And some guy could finally show up and tell me, do you know that actually the origin of it is ancient witchcraft? And that it's absolutely forbidden to do that. So that would be a circumstance where you'd bring the inadvertent sin offering, because you violated witchcraft, but you didn't mean to. You didn't think it was witchcraft. But in these places, like the kind of places I lived, there are Sephardic communities, especially Moroccan communities, that have all sorts of stuff like that going on, where you'd seek out a Kabbalist, and this Kabbalist would come up, and they are, some of them, I'm not saying all of them, but some of them are exactly like these guys in India. They developed this reputation, and they make money, a good amount of money, off of the fact that they are Kabbalists. A few years ago, Forbes had a list. Forbes, I don't know who was compiling it for Forbes, but Forbes had a list of the wealthiest rabbis in Israel. And several of them, I think it was the majority of them, were these kind of Kabbalists. And there's a picture of LeBron James and one of the Schottensteins on a yacht with a Kabbalist, and apparently this particular Schottenstein, when he makes a big deal, he always has this Kabbalist involved. So when are these guys legit? When are they not legit? That particular Kabbalist ended up in jail in the United States for fraud. But I'm sure people were still asking him for their blessing, even when he was, I imagine people just showing up, that the glass, that plate glass where you have the phones and you have to talk to the person, from one side to the other, and some guy's telling him over some business deal he's doing to get his blessing. Anyway, so so how do you know when these guys are legit and when what they're doing is just some version of an old-fashioned witchcraft? And again, this would be, even according to the Rambam, if they're using witchcraft, it doesn't matter if they really believe it works, or it doesn't matter if it really does work. All that matters is they're pretending that they have some kind of power that they're doing. There was one guy, I knew a couple that hadn't had children for many years, and they were told about this Kabbalist in Jerusalem who miraculously intervened in other people's lives, and they were able to have children. But this Kabbalist only spoke Hebrew, and they didn't speak Hebrew. So they asked me to come along as their translator. So the way it worked was, he specialized in Ayin Hara, getting rid of Ayin Hara. So the basic premise was that you really should have certain blessing in your life, but the reason you're not having blessing is because a particular individual cast an Ayin Hara against you, and that Ayin Hara is blocking the blessing from happening. That's the basic premise. So you go to this person, and he looks like he's going into some kind of trance, and he starts mumbling something. And then he says, there was somebody at your wedding who was jealous of you. and cast an ayin hara against you. And he said, it's a powerful ayin hara, but we're going to work on it. We're going to be able to work on it. So it was like there were like three parts to it. One is he's going to do his spiritual work. He's going to do his mystical incantations. And that's going to be one thing against the ayin hara. The second thing is there's this, and it really was a complicated treatment of different kind of herbal teas that they had to use at different times. And then the third thing was they have to give tzedakah to a tzedakah that he oversees. Now, it was not a fortune, but it was a lot of money. It was like, this also was, let's say, 40 something years ago. And at the time it was like $600 that that was the amount that you have to give to the tzedakah. So, and the thing is, and this is what he warned them. He said, ayin hara feeds off of publicity. You cannot talk about this while you're going through the process. If it's successful, if we see that we overcame the ayin hara, then you could talk about it, which meant that there would never be a negative report, because the people who are, you're not going to talk about it if it didn't happen yet, because you're always hoping it's going to happen. So nobody's going to talk about when it didn't work. The only people that are going to talk about it is if it worked. So let's say 100 people went to this guy and it worked once. It doesn't matter. The one time it worked, which means complete, what we'll call luck. We'll call luck or so those will get publicized. And the ones that didn't work, nobody will ever know about them. It was such a obvious scam. But the thing was, I didn't want to disappoint the couple that were going along with it. I'm not saying so I never told them that looking at this, the whole thing smells of a scam. Plus, if you were going to complain, like afterwards, he'll go, "Are you sure you did the T's right?" That thing was so complex. There's no way you knew for sure if you did the T part correctly. So
you give the tzedakah after you got pregnant?
No, you had to give it right away.
Not.
No, because you're
Of
battling
course.
the ayin hara.
Of course.
Tefillah, tshuva, tzedakah, aviras, rog zera. That has to be given right away. This is so important in the battle against the ayin hara. So
Yeah.
it was just like a perfect scam. He looked the part too. He had the right kind of beard. He had the right kind of eyes. He had like those sort of piercing eyes and everything. And it was just such it seemed like it was almost a perfect scam.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
just as you're talking about these things that are very interesting, I was just wondering what the relationship to magic and all that stuff with that you were talking about, and somebody telling you to change your mezuzahs.
So
So if somebody
yeah.
tells you, a rabbi tells you, change your mezuzahs, is that a similar thing that that shouldn't be
Right.
done?
Right. So there again, it's like the dreams. So first of all, it's such an easy thing to say. And it's very, I would say it isn't forbidden to ask somebody to check their mezuzahs, because you're supposed to check your mezuzahs. You don't have to check them every day, but every couple of years you're supposed to check your mezuzahs. So they're not doing anything wrong by checking their mezuzah. So the thing is that every once in a while you're gonna somebody's gonna find something. So let's say somebody finds something, that story will go around like wildfire, that so-and-so found that in the word something or other, and that's exactly what their problem was. Those stories will go around like wildfire. The amount of times that people check their mezuzahs, and by the way, I was once involved in checking people's mezuzahs because I was hanging out with Chabad, with a bunch of Chabad guys when I was like 13. And we would go around, this was in Milwaukee, we'd go around in the Jewish neighborhood and ask people if they minded if we checked their mezuzahs. If you're checking mezuzahs, it is like 90% of mezuzahs you check are not kosher. Amongst the people that were very fastidious to get the best mezuzahs, that's unlikely that their mezuzahs are not kosher. But even amongst them, I don't know what the percentage is, but just from the rolling and the unrolling of it and things like that, something could happen to them. So you're talking about checking mezuzahs, especially if somebody's not sure about where those mezuzahs came from. There could already be a high percentage that mezuzah is not kosher. So to me, it's very suspicious. Every Hasidic, every Rebbe has stories about it. Even Rebbe Tursky has stories about it, where he told some people to check their mezuzahs, and there was something, and it was a whole dramatic story. So,
the reason I'm asking is because I would think that, let's say somebody's having some bad luck, and they go to somebody knowledgeable, and what else can he offer you? You know what I mean? He's not going to say. I mean, he could say it's just your luck that this has happened, or he could say, "Why don't you do something like change your mezuzahs?" You know what I mean?
right. It could be like with a doctor, where they tell you to get more exercise and stay off processed, processed sugar, or something like processed foods, which are generally good advice. I'm not saying that. Oftentimes this suggestion comes from very holy people. So I'm not, of course, very holy people know what they're doing, but it does, most of the time you hear people talking about this, it just becomes from anybody who read one of those stories. And then it becomes like the thing you do. And then when they find it, they believe that the mezuzah was the problem. It is not a forbidden thing to do, but it distracts the person from something else that should be the thing that they're looking at for this kind of thing. And I don't know. It makes me nervous. It also makes me nervous when people talk about mezuzah as a protective device, because it just seems like it's distracting people from the mitzvah of mezuzah. The reason you have a mezuzah is because Hashem commanded us to have a mezuzah. It has Shema, it has V'hayim Shema, like the mission statement of the Jewish people. We're meant to think of those things when we see a mezuzah, like a mission statement, to be reminded of our mission statement. But people have come to think of it as a magical amulet that protects us from something. And so that also gives me...
Rabbi, either last week or 2 weeks ago, Rabbi Wolf asked if he could check our front door mezuzah. Not for any, nothing was bad. He just wanted to check it.
When was the last time it had been checked?
Maybe when we moved in. I don't know.
Yeah.
But so he looked at it and he said, it's fine. It's good. Yeah. I think he was surprised.
Well, you would have made sure to get it from a reliable place. But the fact that he was surprised just shows you how often they are not kosher. So that's also like, let's say I was somebody pretending to be a Kabbalist. That's one of those things where if I do that, 50% of the time it's going to come back that it wasn't kosher, and suddenly that enhanced my reputation. So it's going to be part of my bag of tricks going forward to make sure, just like with you have these people that claim to be able to speak to the spirit of the departed, and they'll say things like, did anybody here have a male relative whose name starts with the letter M who had heart trouble? There's certain things like they know the letter M is a certain percentage of people. Heart trouble is like 60% of people, so they're going to get a hit in a crowd. So that thing of checking mezuzahs is one of those things. Anyways, I am somebody who very much reveres Hasidic masters, and I very much revere their wisdom, which is often sourced in mystical teachings. And if one of them would tell me to check my mezuzahs, I would check my mezuzahs. But at the same time, I think it's okay to have a healthy skepticism about all these kinds of things, especially because some of these things, if they're told to you by somebody who's not a major Hasidic Rebbe, if they're told to you to do it, they could have unclear provenance, and they could cross into witchcraft, and this is something that's very forbidden according to Allah. Okay.